Hey there and welcome back to the Code Wrinkles channel for this brand new video. When it comes to authorization and authentication in ASP.NET Core, do you also start to have headaches? If you do, then this video is for you, so stay tuned because we will talk about one of the very core principles of authentication and authorization in ASP.NET Core, this being a JSON Web Token. So in this video, we'll dive into how we can create such a JSON Web Token, because this will allow us to really understand what the purpose of this JSON Web Token is, what information do we have on that JSON Web Token, and how that Web Token can actually be used afterwards when we want to perform authorization. So stay tuned because we will dive right into it. Before I dive into coding, I would like to briefly explain what a token generally is, because the explanation for this could prove very useful in understanding JSON Web Tokens and their purpose. So when we say the word token, we usually think about a raw piece of material. In many cases it was round, but it could be also in other shapes, and in some cases it had some information written on the token. Now, from ancient societies till nowadays, tokens were used for different purposes. In some cases, for instance, a holder of a certain token or holding a certain token would imply a certain social status that would secure you access to some resources or to some exclusive gatherings. In other societies or in other instances, tokens were used for counting purposes, like counting materials, or even holding some more information about a certain economic aspect, or even information about a certain economic value. More recently, tokens were used kind of like something like an exchange currency for small change, and were widely used, for instance, in video game shops, subways, and other type of things, maybe parkings and supermarkets. Nowadays, however, tokens are mostly replaced by magnetic cards. Now, why is this actually important? Because there are a few things that kind of like could define what a token is. So first of all, a token is something that is issued by some entity and that is widely recognized as a token that certifies a certain thing, that you hold a certain value or that you possess a certain information. And that's exactly the concept of a JSON WT token, or a token generally, when we think about it in terms of authentication and authorization. Now, when it comes to this, I would like to also give an analogy that we will use throughout also the code that we will write. We can think, for instance, about our ID cards or passwords or passports as being tokens, because they are a raw piece of material usually. You have some information written on it, and they are widely recognized that they certify a certain type of information, or that the information that you have on that specific token or your ID card is accurate, and therefore other institutions or other countries can rely on that information that is written on that card. Now, let's go back to this idea of using tokens in the code. JSON WT tokens are nothing else than such tokens that kind of like hold some values that are issued by somebody that is recognized by others, certifying that the information on the token is actually correct. And in order to create such a JSON WT token, we kind of like need to put all these building blocks together. Now, when we want to first create a JSON WT token, the first piece of information that we have to put together is kind of like the information that the token should contain. And for this purpose, in ASP.NET Core or in .NET in general, we have this concept of claims identity. And I will paste some code here that I have already prepared, and we'll try to explain it. So we see here that we declare a new variable, claims identity, which is of type claims identity. Now, a claims identity, as said, it's simply, well, an instance or a class that kind of like describes some information that usually comes in form of key and values. Now, for this claims identity to be created, we need to provide, of course, a list of claim. Now, what is a claim? A claim is nothing else than a certain piece of information about the holder or the consumer of the token that we are about to create and to issue. And that information could be actually anything. We have some standard claims or some standard information that is usually present on a JSON WT token, or a JSON WT, because JSON Web Token kind of like contains the word token in itself. So, but we can add really any type of information that we want or that is useful. In this case, for instance, we want to add an information that comes in this static constant, which is JWT registered claim names, which kind of like is a class that provides us some or a collection of different claim names that are widely used in the entire, well, let's say industry. And for instance, one of those claims is the subject. And in this case, we want to kind of like set the subject to the login.username. Like we have this login class that contains a username, a password, and an email. So we set the subject to the username, which this is a string, this is the key, and this is the value. Then we create a new claim, so a new set of information in form of a key and a value, which is the email. Of course, this is the key, and the value is the email that in our case we will get from the body of the request. And that's basically it. This is how we have created actually a claims identity. Now, if we refer back to this example of the ID card, let's think about it. For instance, we need to create a new ID card, or we need to get a new passport. Now, what we usually do is, okay, we go to the authorities, and the first thing that we do is we kind of like need to fill in some forms. Now, of course, we also have something like a birth certificate, but most of the information that we fill in the forms is actually information that is needed or that will be placed on our ID card or on our password, and that kind of like identifies us, like the first name, the last name, the date of birth, and things like that. So this is the information that we can basically compare to this claims identity. So the first thing that you do when you go to get a new ID card, you have to provide this information usually by completing a form. In our case, we need to provide this information by creating a claims identity. Now, the second step of that is, and let me just go here and copy and paste some other code that I have already prepared for this, and we'll go into explaining what it happens. Now, usually when you get a new ID card, what happens is that, okay, you provide all that information to the authorities that kind of like are responsible to issue you a new ID card or a new passport. And what happens as a next step, the information that you have provided is actually placed in a little bit more wider context. Like it is added to an already existing information, like for instance, who issues that ID card, which country, what authority, how long that ID card is valid. So this type of information is not an information that we provide, but this information is an information that will be placed on our ID card, but it's kind of like defined by the authorities. So that's why in our second step that we need to do here is we kind of like need to create this token descriptor. The token descriptor is nothing else than the wider context in which our claims identity that we have created is actually passed. Now, the other thing that we need to do here, and that's very important when it comes to JWTs, is that we kind of like need to also encrypt them. And in order to encrypt them, we need to provide some signing credentials. So that's why we first have here a key, which needs to be a 32 characters long string, and it needs to be ASCII encoded. So that's why we kind of like encode this, and it will we will get back basically a byte array. Now, taking that byte array, which is the key, and by the way, guys, usually this key you will not have in the code, or you wouldn't have even in the appsync.json. This is a highly sensitive information. You would usually take it from some services like the Azure Key Vault or some other, well, very secure services that kind of like are created for the purpose of holding very secret information or very sensitive information. But for the purpose of this video, I just wanted to keep everything here in the same method so that we can see step by step all the steps through which we need to go when we want to create a JSON Web Token. So having all this information, we can then just create this new token descriptor. And of course, for that, we just, instantiate a new object of type security token descriptor. And here for the subject, we actually set the claims identity that we have created previously. And as I said, for ID cards, the information that we provide in the claims identity is placed actually in a context where we have some additional information that doesn't depend on us to fill in. And that's exactly what we do here. So now, independently on the claims identity, we as issuer of this JWT, we specify, okay, when this token will expire, and I say that it will expire in 2 hours from the moment when it is issued. We can specify an audience. So who is this token intended to? Who should use this token? And then the issuer, which is kind of like who issued the token. In our case, we just provided here this string code wrinkles. But yeah, and you can use whatever name you want to identify you as an issuer. The only thing is that you need to be aware of the name that you kind of like defined as an issuer, because when you validate a token, you have to make sure that the issuer is correct, that the audience is correct, that the expiration date is correct, and so on and so forth. And last but not least, what we do is we provide the signing credentials because we need to encrypt this token, and that's why we need to actually provide the signing credentials. We just create a new instance of signing credentials, and we provide the security symmetric key that we have just created previously, and we define also the security algorithm that we want to use for that. All this type of stuff is present already in .NET, as you can see. So basically, you can just reuse all these things. You don't need to kind of like write your own encryption algorithms for that. Cool. Now let's think once again back to our ID card example. So what happens is that, okay, after you provide your claims identity, so your information, that information is placed into a wider context of information, which is the ID card itself. In our case here, that's the token descriptor. And then last but not least, or the most important step, is the authorities kind of like they fabricate the ID card that you need. So that's exactly what we also need to do. In our case, to fabricate basically a JWT or a JSON Web Token, we need this JWT security token handler, which is once again a type that's actually in this assembly system identity model tokens.jwt. And using this token handler, we can first of all create the token. That's a method on the token, and the result of the token will actually be, as you can see, a security token, which is the object itself. But then the next thing that we will need to do is actually we need to kind of like convert this token, the security token, to a JSON Web Token string, which is a base 64 encoded string. But the token handler covers us because it has this write token method in which we provide a security token and it outputs us a base 64 encoded string. And then we can just simply return this. So that's all. These are all the steps to actually create a token. Now, there are some things that I would like to show you, and I will run this application right now, and we'll see exactly how we can actually make a request to this and what actually happens. And for that, I have already prepared Postman here, where I have created a request, and we can create send, and in a few seconds, I guess we should get something back. And as said, we got back this string, which once again is a base 64 encoded string, which is the standard, well, transportation encoding for JSON Web Tokens or for the JWTs. Now, to actually look a little bit into what this token is, there is really a very, very nice web application that's very useful to use, and this is called JWT IO. And in this JWT IO, I can go here and just place my token or the base 64 string that we have received. And we already can see that this JSON Web Token kind of like contains some information. Now, it contains three different parts. The first part is kind of like the header, in which it specifies the algorithm that it was used to encrypt the token or to sign the token, and the type of the token, which in our case is a JSON Web Token. But then it contains the payload. And in the payload, we get all the information that we have actually provided, plus some additional information that was provided by the token descriptor. Like for instance, in sub here, which is the subject, we get what we have placed in the subject, like it is the username. For email, we get what we have placed in the email when we have created the claims identity, which is the email address. And then we have here some information that actually comes from the token descriptor and not before. It's kind of like NBF, it's not before, and that's kind of like a value in ticks. It says that we can't use this token before a certain time. Then we set the expiration, so when this token expires, and then we say when this token was issued, like it was issued right now, and then here the issuer, this is what we have provided once again in the descriptor, and the audience. The audience in my case is once again the same information that we have provided, and it is Postman. So that's actually what a JSON dub or a JSON Web Token is. And the good thing is that if you understand really these building blocks of a JSON Web Token, what happens is that afterwards, when consumer kind of like or clients make requests or HTTP requests to your service and place that token actually in the authorization header, what ASP.NET Core does, if you configure authorization and authentication, and we'll cover this in a dedicated video, it will simply look or take that base64 string that represents the JSON Web Token, and it will kind of like break it down to these different components that we have used to build it. So it will break it down to a security descriptor, and it will break it down to a claims identity. And if you understand this flow, then really 90% of what authentication and authorization means in ASP.NET Core is already covered. Because bottom line, when we get a request that has such a base64 encoded token in the authorization header, as described, ASP.NET Core will break it down into the different components. And when we actually build an authorization policy, the only thing that we mostly need to do is just look through the claims to certain claims that might be of interest for us, kind of like check if they have a certain value, and based on the information that we have in those claims, we can define if that user is allowed to perform a certain action in an application or not. But this also helps us a lot when we don't issue the tokens ourselves, because most of the times you would probably have Azure Active Directory or AWS Cognito or other third-party services, and they will issue the tokens. Now, that's really not a big problem, because nobody, this idea of JSON WT tokens and their formats, this is actually something that's a standard, so everybody uses the same things. This means that when a request comes in with a token, even if it is issued by Azure Active Directory, for instance, ASP.NET Core still can actually break it down into the different parts, including the claims identity. And in that case, once again, you can look in the claims and define different authorization policies based on the information that you find on those specific claims. So you see that understanding JWTs is really the key to understanding authentication and authorization in ASP.NET Core. If you find this content useful, and if you think that you have learned something new from it, please don't be shy and hit the thumbs up button, and also subscribe to the Code Wrinkles channel if you didn't do this already. Make sure to also hit the notification bell so that you are notified whenever we have something new here on this channel. And if you think that there might be other people that would benefit from watching this content, don't be shy and share it with them, with your peers, through email, to teams, to social networks, on forums, wherever you think that there is somebody that will kind of like benefit of this content. Just share it, and I'm sure that they will be thankful. Last but not least, also, if you have any questions or want to get into a discussion, please leave a comment in the comment section of this video. That would be highly appreciated, and I'm eager to actually respond to your comments and have a chat with you there. This being said, once again, thank you very, very much for watching, and until the next time, I wish you the very best.